Welcome to HR-Unpacked, a podcast about HR workplace issues, where we analyse and then discuss the latest developments in HR and employment law that impact both employers and employees. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you. So welcome to our podcast where we will be reviewing Peninsula's Employer Confidence Index report, taking a look at some of the key issues and challenges that businesses around the world are facing. And we're absolutely delighted to welcome Alan Price, Group Chief Operating Officer at Peninsula UK, and someone I know very well because he's my boss. So it's a strange thing to be starting the week interviewing my boss, but absolute pleasure to have you here, Alan. Thank you. So talk to us. We've got a copy here in front of us, Employer Confidence Index 2025, something I'm quite close to because obviously it's something that's put out by the Peninsula Group. Just give us a bit of an overview about what it's about, why we do it, etc.
I think, as you know, Peninsulas across the world now. It started obviously originally in Salford, close to our hearts here, but we're in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, and that gives us additional insight into what small businesses are thinking about in terms of people management and HR, but also in terms of their confidence moving forward in the wider economy. And you see a lot of these surveys from small businesses, but I think not from the angle of people management, hiring, growing their businesses, what's important to them, and more importantly, how employment law legislation affects them, different around the world. So it's a bit of a unique insight, even as close as Ireland or as far flung as New Zealand, seeing how employers are thinking about the world of work and how it affects them.
I think it's fair to say around this table, how many years of HR experience have we got between us? Well, I've got 20.
20, just over 20, 24, yeah.
Depends where you start. When you think of people management, and my first jobs were really young age, and obviously you need to work on your communication skills, influencing skills, negotiating skills, going door to door, trying to sell berries to your neighbours to make a bit of money. But even then, progressing into sort of washing cars, washing windows, helping the milkman, again, timekeeping's important.
Yep.
It wasn't very good at that at sort of 12 and 13 and 14, and then entering the world of work sort of 15, 16, really young, and coming from working in the retail sector. Great opportunity, and you'll find that with a lot of your students working in retail part-time, but you've got a transient workforce because a lot of them are students and looking to move on in the world of work. It's not a permanent role for them. You've got high demands because the footfall in retail, especially going back sort of 30 years, which was much higher than it is now. You weren't getting items delivered to your door. You were going out looking for what you wanted to buy. So there was a lot of opportunity I felt in retail. So at sort of 17, 18, you were managing people, which is quite young now to be managing people. But again, was working full time, wasn't a student at that point. Came to that later. So you're managing people, a lot of students themselves, a lot of older workers. So you're learning about people management. So I think people management from an operational perspective, sort of really young, and obviously getting into HR and people management not much longer after, actually, because again, in retail, it's quite organised, but you get into normal work, and I got into the insurance industry. That was unionised in Liverpool, so probably being in people management, HR for trying to work it out, probably 20.
You could have said 5 years then, and we'd all thought you were 27.
I might have got away with it. I'm trying to work it out because I think I got involved with the trade union movement when I was probably early 20s. So quite
and do you think
time.
that involvement in the union aspect, and obviously now you're in the employer aspect, but do you think that's given you a broader outlook and helped with your approach to business?
I was literally over the weekend writing a LinkedIn post, which I didn't end up posting then because I didn't finish it, about that employee-employer relationship and coming from the employee angle early on, thinking about, obviously national insurance is about to go up and something we cover in the survey, but in the UK, but being an employee, thinking about my worth and my value and what I should be paid and what I should be rewarded, and then becoming from the employer side, working the cost of employing people, the investment of employing people, the overall cost of running small businesses, your viewpoint changes dramatically. But even as a trade union official, as you go from being a shop steward and a local rep to becoming a branch official and then a national rep, your whole viewpoint changes because you understand what it costs to run a business and profit margins. And my viewpoint changed dramatically from getting involved and then being involved on the employment tribunal system and seeing how things can go wrong with the best of intentions. And then, as you said, at Peninsula, being on the HR helpline, talking to small business owners and their emotion and passion about running a business and why they want to be in business, then trying to navigate employment legislation and employer confidence affects all of that.
For sure.
We mentioned on the last podcast about trade unions, about how HR should work hand in hand. And we both had positive dealings, haven't we, with trade unions? You can have, obviously, things where it doesn't go so well. But I think we've got the same opinion where if you work well with a trade union, they can be positive on the business. You know, if you consult well with them, they can get the message across to staff. Have you had much trade union since you kind of change your roles?
When I worked on the HR helplines with Kate, obviously would be advising clients who are trade unions. But I think it's interesting because obviously you can tell from my accent, I come from Liverpool. My first awareness of the trade union movement was in shop retail, but in the shop I was working, it was high fashion and they paid well and they rewarded well, and therefore the trade unions weren't that prevalent. Going into insurance, I worked for 2 insurers. One was Liverpool based. It was life insurance, quite slow, quite repetitive, but it was high union membership. Recognition was in place. On your recruitment, you were asked to join the trade union. The levy, the deduction came out of your salary, and the union had grown up with Royal Insurance as it was back then, and therefore it was tripartite that had evolved when government and unions and employers worked together to agree pay rates, and any change we made, we consulted on. The union always had ideas that the employer wouldn't, but we were in the same building. We all spoke to each other. It was very transparent. I then moved to another insurance company, another opportunity, but it was home and motor. It was a call centre environment. It was based, if I say where it is, you'll know which insurer it was, but it was based on the far southeast of the UK, and therefore the relationship of the Liverpool call centre and the Glasgow call centre, interestingly, was very much apart. And again, that insurer had grown up with life insurance as well, but the division we were working for was call centre. So again, high churn, high targets, student population, and that came with it some challenges, and therefore we were the last to know about any changes. So it was quite late on in the consultation that we were offshore, and because again, in the late 90s, there was a big push in the UK for offshore, and so our call centre was going to Bangalore. Spoke better English than us in Liverpool, high propensity of degree educated individuals, minimum wage was lower than Liverpool. And that was offshore, and there was very little negotiation or discussion with us. It was just done that way.
I know in your opening statement to the report, you talk about your sum up of 2024 saying one word in its description, transitional. So, I mean, there's so much going on, isn't there? Legislative changes, national insurance contribution increases. Why transitional in your view? What's different this year?
Obviously, you look at the UK market and there's a lot of change, new government, new employment law bill. But you see around the world a shift in terms of the political viewpoints, and a lot of small businesses are affected because consumer confidence affects purchasing power when you want to buy from business. And if businesses want to grow. And I think in the UK market, we saw a big change in terms of employer confidence towards growth. And obviously employment legislation, one of the questions that we asked was around how comfortable do you feel with the employment legislation landscape? And I think about 80% of the UK were really concerned or worried about, because change worries everyone. Whereas you look at the Australian market, it was 20% because fairly stable political situation, no big labour law changes. Slightly left of centre government, and therefore employment changes don't make a big difference there. But if you look at employment law in Australia, which the way we do, you've still got that tripartite relationship. You've got national pay agreements in all industries, which makes it really hard to change. Whereas in the UK market, that's Jonathan know better than me. The lack of a tripartite relationship. Obviously, we're in the 70s, and we don't have that. You look at the Irish market, where there still is a little bit of labour law regulation and pay regulation in a number of industries. But then you look at the growth of the Irish economy versus the UK economy. Is that the right relationship? You look at the growth of the Australian economy. You've got stability with those sectoral pay agreements, and we don't have that in the UK. Even, I think the last one we had was the agricultural wages order. You don't hear of that anymore. Wage orders don't exist in the UK. People had concerns and view about how much it controlled the economy. We had stability, and that uncertainty exists because there's a lack of that here.
And recruitment, we were talking about that on the one of the last podcasts as well. Massive challenges in job market contraction, and a lot of people not jumping ship at the minute, sticking with the role that they're in. How do you get good talent in the world we're in today, Alan?
Peninsula's in the UK is probably 2,500, nearly 3,000 staff, but we still run like a small business.
Yeah.
So refer a friend, refer a colleague. A lot of our staff are at Salford doing postgraduate qualifications. A lot of our staff live in the local area, but they know people. And the great thing with talent, if you're referring a friend or family member, you're going to rate them yourself. So that sort of first sift of interviews done for you.
Yeah. And a lot of saving on agency fees as well.
there's a big saving on recruitment fees, because what recruitment agencies have is a talent pool.
Yeah.
But in your own community, in your own sort of peer network, you've got a community.
It's untapped sometimes, isn't it, as well?
Exactly. And asking the question, and I know my identical twin brother works for the company. He works in the Sydney office now. Kate's niece works
She does.
For Peninsula Group. So Greater Manchester is a big place, and obviously I come from Liverpool. We've got staff coming from Warrington and even further afield. I think accessing your own peer networks, community networks, because they don't let you down. I think that's an opportunity for recruitment.
Yeah, just before there's any allegation of nepotism, they got the job off their own backs.
Different surnames, didn't even know.
Yeah.
My twin couldn't get away with that, unfortunately.
And we need to know how David's copped of the benefit of Sydney, and you're in Manchester. That doesn't seem fair, Alan.
Yeah.
I got Dublin, he got Sydney. I think I joined Peninsula 3 or 4 years before David, and we had small businesses together. But I always liked the comfort blanket of a salary, and David always took the view of investing and being there every day. But we don't cut hair, we don't make tracksuits, we don't wash cars. So a lot of the businesses we have are quite sort of labour intensive. So there's only so much effort you can do to scale those businesses. So being on the HR helpline, you speak to a lot of business owners, and a couple of times I got approached, and obviously you can't necessarily work for a client. And I used to say to a couple of clients, I have got someone who looks like me and talks like me that could do it. So that's how I got them away. And the small businesses that we run, labour intensive, subject to a lot of regulation and tax, and it's hard in a small business in running and scaling it. And we have big ambitions. So one of the jobs that I got approached for was a back to work scheme with the Department of Work and Pensions run. And it was to run the Scotland and Northern contract, which that business had won. And they said, do you know anyone? I said, like who? You? I said, no, quite happy where I am. Because Peninsula was growing.
Yeah.
The issue with consumer confidence is businesses don't know where to turn to. And one thing that obviously Peninsula's good at in terms of employment law is we understand it. And we sort of break it down into what small businesses can process. But ultimately, we're providing the support to take them through it. So I saw Peninsula grow, and I joined early 2000s, and you started to see the positives and consequences of the Employment Rights Act in 96 and flexible working and all the cheapy legislation changes. And that change brings, again, a bit of solidity for small businesses. They know where they stand. But change is hard. And what lawyers charge per hour, we can charge per month because of scale. So I'm on the helpline seeing the calls increase, and I'm saying to me, brother, you need to get in here. There's loads of opportunity. And went to work for a client instead. In Oldham, actually.
Oh, was it?
So we ran the Oldham
I did not know that.
So we was in Chadderton next to DWP running the Back to Work scheme. And the Back to Work scheme, for those listeners who don't know, it was DWP would give you a small grant. If you could create a business plan, you'd come off the unemployment figures. And I think for 12 weeks, they'd take you through how to set up a business, employment law, regulation, and get you off unemployment benefit with a bit of a grant and a bit of support in the medium term. And he ran the Chadderton.
There you go.
Back to Work
you
scheme.
learn something new every day.
Yeah. We're both from Chadderton, aren't we?
Jonathan's from Chadderton.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's actually less of a broad accent than Kate. But he ran the Chad, and he had 2 officers, and they were the best back to work scheme in the UK.
Right.
That was one of his claims to fame. And then they lost the contract through Tupi, didn't want to transfer, and came to Peninsula.
Right.
Place to be in it, Chad.
It is, yeah, centre of the universe. In the report, it talks about the different ways of working. How have you seen different ways of working change over the years?
The interesting point, again, with our business, we see it in Ireland, Canada and Australia. We saw the UK return to work in SME first. Why was that? I think anecdotally, UK big economy, big service economy. Even in our office, we were quite back to work quite soon. We were different in that technology didn't drive us back to work, but we support nearly 100,000 small businesses in the UK. They need us, champion back to work. If it's your coffee, it's your dry cleaning.
That's a massive number.
Yeah, massive.
Huge clients.
And it's across various brands. Obviously, we have different routes to market now. So we've got a sort of Bright HR at the micro end, very digital first, a lot of self-serve, so through AI and through software. You then got the Peninsula brand, which is the mainstay, the big history, the big, large client base. And then you've got Krona and Krona Information now, which is serving either the larger customers, your HR directors rather than your HR managers. So across the UK economy, 100,000 small businesses. So you're seeing a lot of insights of how they went back to work. And I think in the UK, we saw a big shift back to work. Ireland next. Interestingly, Canada's lockdown was one of the longest across the globe. And Australia as well. And I think, again, Australia had a big lockdown. Tourism was affected. My twin brother lives just off the famous Bondi Beach, and that was empty for over a year because they weren't letting tourists back in. So the service economy there was massively impacted by back to work. But I think with small businesses, technology drives hybrid. And if you're a small business and you don't maybe have the phone solution or the access to all your documents at home, it makes it challenging. So we saw a lot of small business getting back to work. And again, a lot of small businesses we talk about before in recruitment, they employ a lot of family members, family friends. You don't want to be in your family members or family friends' house working from home, or so getting back into that sort of environment. And I think as well, that distinction from home and work in a small business is very strong because you don't have the same opportunities, I think, in a small business to have that sort of break. So I think we saw a lot of return to work. But again, even in the consumer survey, it wasn't a big challenge in the UK, I think, because they went back to work 3 or 4 years ago. And you see a lot in the press about back to work because it's the big business doing it now. The people who are the PLCs who are doing it, and therefore they're the ones with the big impact in terms of being newsworthy. You didn't hear it for the small businesses.
We've actually done a lot of press and PR. I think you have as well, Jonathan, haven't you, with the BBC in Manchester when there's been these big announcements about your Amazons, etc., going back to work. So, you know, it's divisive, it's quite emotional, isn't it? And it gets some press attention.
I think with small businesses going back to work, it's 3 or 4 people. You don't hear about it, but when 3,000 or 4,000 people are going back to work, and you've already got to look at the roads coming into Manchester on a Monday and a Friday, they're much quieter. But you're starting to see Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday get busier. So I think hybrid's here to stay, and it works better for some companies than it does for others. But I think we've seen a lot of the smaller businesses get back to work sooner because communication, it must be said, if you're around a table, it can be improved if you're face to face. Yeah, interesting. We just did our management meeting this morning, and demand for Friday went down massively. Friday and the sun's out. Go figure. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's good. That hybrid approach is good. I think I know there's a change because of the younger kind of generation coming into the workforce. They want to be in the workplace because younger people generally do. But having that option generally to either be in the workplace or not, and having that good mix is good for well-being, I think. And the CIPD research on it, the research they've done, it stated that if productivity wasn't affected by people working from home, or it stayed the same. So overall, in the main, it is generally good in terms of the hybrid approach. But it's dependent on the business, because obviously some businesses can't do it. But I think it is here to stay. But the hybrid approach is the model, not just kind of say, yeah, you can work from home. It's got to be a mixture, I think. And I think it's the maturity of the business, the strength of the leadership team. What are you doing ultimately day to day? Are you working on a standalone, mature business in an activity that doesn't need much peer support or development? But also the challenge we find with a lot of businesses that we speak to, where you've got maybe someone who's working maybe in a creative or digital standalone role, and you've got someone in a back office service role. You do have a bit of a dichotomy where there's a little bit of looking at them and what they can do it and I can't. Yeah. And there's a little bit of, we're all in this together. The world of work is changing. But should one particular skill set or age of individual get a certain type of work because it suits them? And there's some brave decisions for employers to say, actually, if we want the majority of our workforce in work, to do the marketing individuals, to those in finance, to those in creative roles come in more to support those who can't. If you're the receptionist and you're a customer-facing environment, or you're in retail, for example, in retail, who can work from home? Yeah. There's only a few individuals who can. And I know going on the shop floor,
20 years ago. Sorry, 30. I forgot how old I was then. 30 years ago. So 30 years I've been in the world of work, people and HR management. I can even remember those being on the top floor. That were the back office.
Yeah.
The buyers, the finance people. I thought they had it easy. They weren't like brushing up and tidying up, and we called it standards, but it was how the clothes looked and were set out on the floor and the merchandise, and you had to be there every day, and you got your lunch. Be half an hour, 45 minutes max. And we thought those who were on the office floor had it easy, and that sort of camaraderie of all strength of purpose, back to the trade union movement, the collective is better than the individual. Are we going to move to sort of an environment where some employers are going to say, you can be hybrid, but there's parts of our business that can't be? Do you treat them the same? Do you reward them the same? And then there's a balance of how do you reward those who have to travel in every day and those who don't? And the work-life balance for them, do you give them more support in terms of mental health support, maybe?
While you're on reward, obviously national insurance contributions going up. There's a lot of businesses out there that just can't afford to give a pay increase. So in your experience out with of pay, what are the other really good practical things that businesses can do to engage and reward the staff?
You're going back to consumer confidence again and business confidence. National insurance and minimum wage is having a big impact. We understand for the greater good, but if you look at our own business, it's £3 million for Peninsula UK companies. We're not passing that on to the client, we're not passing that on to the customer, we're not looking at large scale redundancies. But it affects our ambition on growth. We're looking into AI a lot at the moment. We're looking at new products and services. Are we scaling them back? No, because we're privately owned. The family trust, our owners are saying, no, let's invest more, let's go for growth. But it's a big step for a small business owner, for any business, to say, our costs are going up, we're going to go for growth. But it's that long-term ambition, long-term growth. And our Peninsula's been around since 1983, 1984. We've seen our owners, our group CEO has seen that cyclical upwards and downwards trend, and you've got to go for growth. But to answer the question about how do you reward staff, first of all, you've got to decide what motivates your staff, and it's different in every workforce. Yep. Our staff love learning. So obviously we're lucky to have a partnership with Salford University, but if you can invest in your staff, keep them back to recruitment and retention, it costs more to train and pay a recruitment agency than it does to invest in your staff. A lot of employers don't make the most of their apprenticeship levy, and that's an opportunity to invest.
Yeah. I find it crazy that companies don't train staff up. I find it incredible. I was in a shop, I won't name the shop, it's a multinational, or a big chain anyway in the UK, and the service was shocking. And my son was with me, and he was saying, what's going on with, they were rude, so they've not been trained up properly. It's mainly that, you can see it, the culture of it. And I know that we've run the postgraduate program with Peninsula for 4 years now, and it's a fantastic program, and it helps retention, but it helps development in the main. And I think most staff want that. I know pay is always going to be up there about what they want, but development is another one as well, and it's a great way of recruitment and retaining staff.
I think we're very lucky. We have a career pathway, and with that, either skill or productivity results in either a biannual or an annual pay rise. And not everyone wants to go up the skills ladder or the productivity ladder, but the more they learn and invest that in the business, the more we can reward them, and the more they can do, because not every role is high skill based. We can reward them, so that's a big one for us. But sort of our raison d'etre is commoditized professional services, HR, health and safety, now into tax and accountancy information as well. But to do that at scale means you've got to break it down to its component parts. But if we can reward for that, and I look at my career, and Kate had a similar journey. I come in as a trainee HR advisor with no professional qualifications. The trade union had given me some credits at Leeds University on negotiating skills and employment law, but it was Peninsula that put me through Salford. Mm-hmm. It was Peninsula that supported me with the CIPD programme, and I've got a great sort of value from that, what Peninsula's given me.
And great loyalty as well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I was a lot younger when I joined, but that growth and changing regulation and consumer confidence, when businesses contract, we'll support them. When businesses grow, we'll support them. So employment law, people management shouldn't be at the end of a process, and we see that all the time. Yeah. And I see that sort of in other areas that I work, where problems go wrong, and that's when they involve HR. Mm. But what was your employment relationship like when you started? as you said, the training, the offer letter, what to talk about the expectations, the job description. Is it a list of duties or ambition? The employment contract, the employee handbook. Are your policies enabling the employee? Because most employment disputes arise from a miscommunication. The employee feels wronged and the employer feels wrong, and they don't join in the middle.
Yeah.
And at the end of the process, you'll sometimes see claimants and respondents say, I wish somebody explained that at the beginning. But was HR at the table when the decision were made, or were they at the end of the process trying to make good? I think that's the challenge.
5 years since we went into lockdown, which I just think is crazy because it seems like yesterday, doesn't it? But 5 years ago, what did you personally learn from COVID? I certainly know I came out of that a different individual, a different thinker from a business perspective. What did you, from a horrible situation, was there anything positive to take away for business?
So 5 years ago, my oldest son would have been 2, so I got to spend a hell of a lot more time with him, and I think he was grateful for that. I think resilience goes up. I think for us being an international business, we'd never really used Teams or the variety of platforms. We were always face to face. We'd visit all our sites very frequently, not just in the UK and Ireland, but Canada and Australia. So I think that virtual communication improved dramatically. I think I learned to trust people more because the way my style of management and leadership is, I like to talk, as you can tell, but I like to listen as well. But I think during COVID, that medium changed so much. We used to have a lot of regular meetings, a lot of agendas, and a lot of metrics that we'd share within our business. You weren't able to do that, and also I think switching off in our business, because we have a lot of highly motivated, highly rewarded people who want to grow all the time. But during COVID, you had to switch off, literally. And I think a lot of our colleagues, and me included, when you had that sort of scheduled walk you were allowed to do, or the time you were allowed to go into a shop with your mask on for a certain period and get your slot, I think in some ways became more regimented, but in other ways that disconnect. And obviously within our HR business, we built a lot of software that allowed you to clock in and clock out and force you to clock out at home. But I think that was good. I think your support networks grow both in work and at home. You can rely on. Look, you had to rely on them. I think our management team came closer together. We had daily calls, and Kate will tell you about them, where probably 20 of our senior leadership team globally came on a daily call. And it started operationally about how do we get our phones to work, how do we get our PCs to work. Some of those systems don't actually work at home. They were never set up for that. And it became quite not jovial, but we asked how everyone was, and it was really, really fun. I think I enjoyed it. And you started with one screen at home, and then 2, and then I ended up with 3. But you had everyone on the screen. What's your background and where do you live? And you got a bit more sort of a social understanding of the business. And because again, our sort of business is about disrupting professional services. Our way of working is quite disruptive in that it's very numbers driven and metric driven, and you don't necessarily see the people when you grow, and everyone wants to learn all the time. So I think you got to see a different side of people. Yeah,
I think it showed to me that everyone really did have each other's backs, and in those moments when you were feeling a bit, this is horrendous, those calls were actually quite uplifting for the day,
My 2 years just sit on my lap and I didn't even know you had kids. Not that you don't talk about them, but it's a fast-paced environment, and we've always got to remember in our business, clients trust the micro small businesses, and they're trusting us with their hard-earned money. And what is £100 to some businesses might not be a lot, but to a small business owner, 2 or 3 staff, it's a lot. And they still want that legal or HR professional service. They're buying a HR director and a lawyer and a health and safety professional sitting next to them every day, but they're paying a small amount of money in the scheme of things. So the pressure's always on us, and therefore that pressure sometimes translates into how we lead. And seeing my 2-year-old sitting on my lap with the headphones on, wanting to get involved in the conversation. I think
we're waiting until he's 16, then he's on the line.
I think it made people laugh, and a few people brought the kids
human.
in. I think that human side of work sometimes gets forgotten.
We did some research and we interviewed about 12 companies at the end of lockdown, and then 12 months later about the impact. And we were kind of like feeling our way about how we were going to measure this impact. But what came out of the research is that social value and trust, which is what you've mentioned, increased. and social value between the company and its stakeholders, its clients and the people it work with, but with its staff members within the company increased a lot as well.
Yeah.
Because technology was a bit of a catalyst of that, but it kind of forced people to communicate a bit more and do things which you wouldn't ordinarily do, like put your son on your lap, and just it brought more people together, which I think is definitely missing from the workplace.
Yeah.
It's hard to create that kind of culture, and the lockdown forced that upon companies, I think. And a lot of the research reflected that, about that increase in the value of the company and the trust for employees as well.
For some reason, everyone psychologically wanted to move on. So you forget a lot of the circumstances. But even in our business, I think we had over 5,000 clients that we gave a payment holiday to.
Yeah.
Because if you were in the restaurant trade, you were closed.
Yeah.
If you were in hospitality, you couldn't trade. But you had to look at, were you laying people off? Were you putting them on redundancy? So our calls went through the roof, but rather than try and make that into an opportunity to gain revenue for the companies within the Peninsula Group, we knew that if they survived it, then they'd keep working with us,
yeah,
and they'd grow and we'd grow. But if we let them go, the impact to them and their staff and wider afield, and I don't think we made enough of a point of that. Like 4,000 or 5,000 businesses across 3 or 4 brands. Don't worry about paying us. Don't worry about the insurance premium.
Yeah.
A lot of our clients have an insurance-backed advice service. We'll support you through it.
Yeah.
But in doing so, a lot of those companies are still trading. And
yeah.
You're right, Jonathan. We've never gone back to them and said, "How did you feel about that support?" And
yeah.
knowing we were there at the end of the line. And a lot of them, if you remember furlough on a Friday night, it was always a Friday night. There'd be a change to the furlough scheme.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And we built this within the Bright HR business within the group. We built a furlough navigator because you had to record, I think, for 6 years. It's coming to an end soon. We might be able to turn it off, but all your furlough payments. But the rules were changing, who was in, who was out.
Yeah.
So our helpline on a Friday evening, first of all, the research team that Nicola, who works for Kate, runs, were just going through it all. And it wasn't plain English, the way it was written. Most employment law isn't. But being there for those small business owners, it was a lifeline. And not just understanding the change in legislation, but just being able to talk about it. And again, we're really lucky that we have within the group a mental health business called Health Assured. Being able to signpost clients, like it's very rare in business where you've got those signposts where you can say, that's a health and safety issue, pregnancy in the workplace. We can help you with that. The employee's stressed about pregnancy in the workplace. We get mental health support and even signposting them to a 6 or 8 session CBT model. So during that period, our health and safety teams, our mental health teams are really busy, but that trust and that sort of impact, I don't think we made enough of. And I think everyone was so in a rush to get away from COVID and forget about COVID. Yeah. No one really looked back the way you have to say, actually, what was the impact and what can we learn from it?
We're going a million miles an hour as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing I really took away from it is the importance of self-serve and AI alongside in-person HR advice, because we've got something called Brainbox, haven't we? We didn't have it at that point. And Friday our calls were 1,700. On days during COVID, we were taking 10,000, 11,000, but call after call, what is furlough? What is furlough?
Yeah.
What is furlough? And I was doing it. I was on the phone doing it. If we'd have had Brainbox at that point, how much better would that have been operationally?
There's 2 points, Neil. Everyone from health and safety to legal all became HR advisors during COVID. Some had to cross-qualify, some were doing triage calls. But we had lawyers who used to be in an employment tribunal every day having to give advice, and they found it hard. They said, we thought litigation was hard, but when you're doing 30 calls a day or 20 calls a day, depending on the query, it was tough. But again, with the world of work, trying to get small business owners to open up about hiring and firing, because we all have our biases and viewpoints of employees. But the first step is picking up the phone and talking to us about it. But they don't always want to speak to you about the protected characteristic or the thing they shouldn't do.
They're quite defensive, aren't they, as well?
Very. But with Brainbox or AI tools, you can ask, it doesn't record the answer.
Yeah.
So we're trying to push employees, ask the silly question. I want to dismiss a pregnant employee. One, you shouldn't. But why do you want to do it? Well, I've got to replace them. But how much training have you given them? And the AI tool hasn't learned that much yet to understand basically that level of prompt, but it is learning all the time. And I think businesses that reward and look after the staff grow. But it's a big hurdle to get things right and do it right. But when they do, we think they grow. And we've done, again, other surveys in the past that businesses are more successful who do it right, but there is an initial investment.
I think one area for me I'd like to just ask about is the legal changes, the Employment Rights Bill. That, in the Labour manifesto, there were 60 changes related to employment law. That's mutating now into law. What do you see as the biggest change within all that flurry of activity?
If 80% of UK employers are worried about it, then I think it's the lack of clarity. There's a lot of press around what's going to come in, what's not going to come in. Personally, I don't think it's going to come in until August 2026. I think there's going to be probably a 9-month probationary period, which in effect is a 9-month unfair dismissal rule.
Yeah.
And it was 12 months previously, and then it's been 2 years, and it's varied somewhat. So I think the changes themselves is creating uncertainty, and employers don't know when to invest or what to do. And when they're looking at probationary periods now, what do we put in my contract? Do we put 3 months, do we put 6, do we put 9?
It's a strange one, that.
I think there's a lot of noise around a probationary period. It's just going to be unfair dismissal at 9 months. Probationary periods were previously 3 and 6 months. You didn't have day one employment law unfair dismissal rights for them. But you'll also see a change where a lot of employees would bring claims under discrimination law if they could, because they couldn't claim unfair dismissal. Some of them may sweep away from day one, and they'll become unfair dismissal claims at 9 months.
And they're the big ones, aren't they? The high liability ones as well, with no compensatory cap. So if it shifts it over, that could be a positive.
But again, a lot of employees don't want to go to ACAS because of their employee or employer, and they're literally on the fence. They're in the middle. They're trying to keep everyone happy, and a lot of small businesses can't afford lawyers. HR consultancies, of which there's a number now, but it's having the trust and confidence again to know them. When we set up in business, a lot of our clients were in Salford. They're in the Northwest. They knew us. They were local to them. A lot of employees, small employees, stay local and want to shop local, and therefore trying to find a HR consultant that is local to them can be hard. And to get that commodity of scale, you need contact centres or large groups of people sitting together, and that bit about trust and locality becomes a challenge.
I always found with HR, you needed to understand the company, the culture of the company, because everybody works differently. And I know employment law is a bit of a framework, but it is flexible based on how the company operates. When I've been to tribunals to observe it and done the research on it, you can see the lay members now, there's not that many as the lay members. It's normally just the judge sitting alone now. But those lay members had that real world input. So I think you were a lay member?
Yes, still am.
You still am, right? Okay.
So I think laymen bring industry norms, and I think there's been a fairly recent change now where if you look at the Employment Tribunal claim form, you can now ask for a full panel.
Oh, right.
It's at discretion of the judge or the legal officer. But employment judges can now ask for a full panel. So you'll start to see a full panel's get an unfair dismissal. You normally see them on discrimination, complex cases where industry norms. So you'll start to see, I believe, from a personal viewpoint, employment judges asking for a full panel again. Obviously, with the backlog of claims there is. Now, again, you see a lot in the news about backlogs of employment claims, but a lot of them equal pay, as there's 3,000 cases, next couple of thousand cases. So the backlog's not as big as what you think it is, but they take judicial resources. So the industrial tribunals were set up as an industrial court, not as a legalistic court, and therefore that industrial knowledge that the HR professional and the employee professional brings, just I think makes it a lot easy to understand. If you're trying to understand gross misconduct, which can be quite a broad set of circumstances. So the example that I always use is borrowing money in one sense of the word. So you've got some petty cash in the office, quite a relaxed environment, and you all take money out for your lunch and you pay it back, and there's a little docket. You work in retail. There's no petty cash. It's a cash till. You're taking the same amount of money, but the employee treats that completely differently than a small office environment versus a retail environment. In one environment, that's gross misconduct, it's theft or misappropriation of funds. In another environment, you've got to put a piece of paper in and the reasonableness of that. Expecting the judiciary to have a really clean understanding of that can be quite difficult. And where you've got parties represented by lawyers, it becomes legalistic. And I think that's the challenge. And the tribunal rules are changing, where you've got legal officers looking at cases, you've got lay members coming back in, but ultimately it is becoming a more legalistic jurisdiction to deal with, and ultimately employees should be able to resolve it themselves. And that was the whole point of ACAS. And you see even mediation, a lot of employers are still saying to ACAS, no, gone through the mediation day, I'd rather just have my day in court. And again, I think it's back to that relationship that you talked about earlier, Jonathan, between the employee and the employer. It's your greatest investment, but some employers still see it as a cost.
Yeah.
It's an investment. And if you can train and support and nurture that investment and it grows, your business will grow with it. But you're a small business. You went into business because you're passionate and you're emotional about that passion. That can sometimes flip maybe too high over into the workplace and how you treat your staff, because a lot of staff don't have that social relationship or don't have shares. If you work for the co-op, it's different, maybe. But even in John Lewis, we've all seen the challenges there where it's partnership, but a lot of their growth came from that partnership. That partnership's eroded, they're not getting the bonuses now. There's a lot of change. Their business isn't performing as well. I wonder if there's a connection.
In the Employer Confidence Index report that you produce, it mentions AI and it mentions recruitment and retention. What are your thoughts on the use of AI in recruitment?
Within our business, obviously we have AI tools, but we don't learn from the content our clients put in. And it's our own, obviously, content. I think a lot of small businesses that we speak to are worried about where's it going to go. And you'll have seen over the last couple of months, a number of the AI tools start to say, there's a version that doesn't learn from your content. You can use it for efficiency, but we're not going to learn from you. But a lot of these AI tools were set up to learn and hopefully gain potentially an income from it. So I think there's opportunity, but where you're putting personal identifiable information into an AI language model, there's GDPR considerations there. So I think there is an opportunity. Google now have got Gemini, which is quite easy, but a lot of these tools are out of date and they're only getting updated if you pay for them. So there's always sort of a challenge about how current is the information you're being served. I think it's an interesting area. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of resource going into it within our own business as well. But what we're trying to do is anonymize some of the queries the clients can get it quicker. It's anonymised, which means hopefully we'll get more intake. There's 10% of our clients every year that never ring the helpline.
Yeah.
They must have a staff challenge, or a staff opportunity.
Yeah.
And even in our business that's 40 years old, they still see some clients see it as a 999 service. How can 10% of clients never ring us? They must have it. Now they might use us for health and safety or HR documents, but they don't ring the HR helpline. Can AI give them that corporate veil, so to speak, where they can maybe ask it a question, but knowing where that information goes? And I still think AI's got a bit of work to do to explain to individuals. I asked an AI tool the other night, where does my information go? Where does it say? I got a very flowery answer. Now, I wasn't telling it anything that was confidential, but that makes you think.
Yeah, not really reassuring, that, is it? I'm not just sucking up because you're my boss, but you are an excellent entrepreneur, and I can personally say I've learned a lot from you, Alan, over the years. So you're performing at a really high level, day in, day out, moving from one thing to another. How'd you do that?
I think I've had really two great mentors in my career. When Peninsula was founded, it was Peter Doe, the CEO. He was the salesman. He was the one with the ideas on the road. And then there was a consultancy director who passed away called Anthony Sutcliffe. They both had a passion for the business.
Yeah.
And Anthony worked at Iceland, was a HR manager there. I think he might have been involved with the Iceland case in terms of the leading employment law case.
I didn't know that either. I didn't know he worked in Iceland. But
he loved HR, and when he joined Peninsula, he did the advice line, tribunals and documents, because it was much smaller back then. But I think having a passion for what you do and a hobby, and I think coming from retail, I think gives you the opportunity to work at pace.
Yeah.
If you've worked in retail, I think for one, I think loving what you do. A lot of people like sports, gaming, a variety of different hobbies. Mine was always HR and employment law, and I always thought of employment law a bit like Coronation Street. There's a story. There's these two people, the employer and the employee. There's something going on, but you get to the nub of what actually happened, and there's a framework. Yeah. There's a set of rules that underpin it. So I always found it interesting. I think coming from a retail and then a call centre background, my expectation of work was really high in terms of volume. So if you work in retail, it's high volume. If you work in call centre, it's high volume. So I was sort of wired in a way that I'd already had that pace. So going to a professional service environment, even though it was commoditised, even though it was disruptive to the legal service and HR model, it still wasn't as fast as a call centre. It still wasn't as fast as retail. So I think I was wired. And then those two really good mentors, and then my twin brother being in the business. One, you've got a bit of competition, and competition can be healthy, don't get me wrong. Some people can go too far, but having that competitive edge, I think, helped. But also, he's an Australian. our Sydney office now, so it's a little bit different, but we speak every morning, every night, so it's a bit of, you're able to unload. I think all our leaders in our group have done a stint or a long period in our HR contact centre, Kate being one of them.
Yeah.
Because they've all worked in people management, they've worked in a high-paced environment, they're leading businesses now, which makes my job easier. So I learn from them too. I hope I've imparted some of my knowledge onto them. And those two individuals are more mature. I've got a lot of life experience. Our owners run a lot of different businesses. None that you hear about because none of them worked out. One is very well known. But we were of a size and a scale where he taught all the senior leadership team why not to do something, and all those life lessons. But working on the HR helpline, you're talking to, back then, 30 or 40 businesses, 8 to 20 now, because you've got to give that quality service, and we were growing so quick. But if you're speaking to 100 businesses a week, you're talking to 400 a month. That's 4,000 insights a year.
Yeah.
From everything to, you talked before about employees have different approaches. You'd have your digital savvy startup where everyone's a shareholder, everyone's dogs with them, or everyone's got a Nerf gun, or it's very fascinating, it's fun, everyone's involved. And then you've got your heavy manufacturing business where it's very productionized and very old fashioned. You've got all the different viewpoints and they meld into your own. So you're getting 4,000 insights a year, a bit like research, and research can shape a lot of thinking. We're getting all that insight from different people from around different parts of the world, different parts of the UK, different upbringing. If you're willing to learn and you see that knowledge as sort of interesting, it makes you a better leader.
Yeah.
And you put all of that knowledge. So when we're doing IT or we're doing refits of our building, I can remember the stories of, we made a mistake on our build, I've had to let someone go. We've had a trip, slip or fall because we didn't set the business up. So all that knowledge, if you've got a thirst for learning, it all goes into your brain. So I think that's sort of helped me scale. And the trade union movement is one side, the employer movement the other, the tribunal system, being a non-exec of the CIPD for a number of years, living in Ireland, working with charities. And again, the CIPD is a charity, so is Air Ambulance. And then you've got your village hall, which is a completely different end of it. So I think in terms of my sort of personal growth, it's been contrast. Yeah. Come from a council estate, working in a professional services environment in Manchester, seeing those different sides of the coin day in, day out gives you... I don't want to go back to a council estate. Great place to learn and grow, but they're a hard place to live.
Yeah.
So I think having that anchor and contrast of what it would be like growing up, I think gives you that drive. It's aged me on.
Yeah, brilliant.
Good stuff. It's great to see your trajectory. Because obviously you came to Salford in 2007, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fantastic to see your trajectory, how great you've done. And when you talk, you can see you immerse yourself in not just one siloed area. You've done a multitude of things, like you've discussed. And I'm the same. I love employment law and labour law and trade unions as well. But the kind of research but the practicality side of it as well. But the way you talk about it is fantastic to see. And coming back to the report as well, it's not going to change employment law. It's these big changes to the Employment Rights Bill. It will continually change all the time, and employers have got to make sure that they're ready. And I like what you said earlier on about, and I view employment law like this: it's a framework to protect both the employer and the employee, and it should be a preventative measure, not just a 999 call, as you said.
If every employee enters the relationship with a clear set of rules that they both agree to, and a pathway for growth, they won't go wrong. Yeah. But that honeymoon period in an interview, you've probably only got one ear open, and you hear what you want to hear, and you get an employee handbook and a contract of employment or a statement of main terms, and you're still in that honeymoon period. You're looking over there, you're looking at new people, new peers, new opportunities, and you're not thinking about what the rules were. And a rule isn't a bad thing, it's just a limit. Yeah. I think a lot of employees don't think like that. And even in our organisation, because we're fast growth and there's loads of opportunity, there's people we let down. And it's because of that pace and not going back to, this is what we've agreed and why, and consequence. And I remember a long time ago someone saying to me, a disciplinary is not a bad thing, whereas in the trade union movement, if someone got a warning, it was a means to an end, a means to a door. It's the correct behaviour. It's to tell you that rule's been broken. You've only got 3 or 4 times to break it, and you're going to have to look elsewhere, and it's not going to be good for you or for the business.
And a good trade union rep would know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was my positive experience of the unions when I worked in facilities management. They would tell the employee, you should be in here, shake their hand at the end of the hearing. And to be able to do that, and it's been conducive for both parties at the end of a formal process is what it's supposed to be about, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had one employer, one insurance company, where I'd go in and not have to take anything, and then another, I used to take in the ACOPs, the ACAS Codes of Practice, and there were little booklets like that, and I'd take them in the room and just leave them there. And the employer would be looking at them all the time, and it was subconscious for me, and a union badge. And I had to wear a shirt and tie, and it was a call centre where no one wore a shirt or tie.
Yeah.
But it was like a uniform and a bit of armour as well, because it was reminding them that if you get our own rules, if we can't move forward with this, there's some ACAS rules that you're going to have to be governed by. But it's a backstop, and that's the problem. I think with a lot of small employers that. You don't tend to see a lot of small employers in the employment tribunals again, but you will see a lot of large employers, because a small employer feels it and understands it, and it takes up a lot of their time and money. Large employers have the facilities to deal with it, and it's run of the mill. I know of some employers that would have an employment litigation fund to either fund defence or fund awards.
Yeah.
That's not the right way to run a business. And I think when you get to a certain size, everything becomes a number or a rule. But you've got to be flexible. And I think that flexibility makes a massive difference. And even we're getting to a size now where we're having to remind leaders, no, you don't have to do that exactly like that. So there was a very anonymised case, but a conduct issue. The employee was leaving in 3 days. You're not going to correct the behaviour or the way of working in 3 days, but they've hit a trigger and they're going to go to this process. And we're having to remind HR professionals, what was the point of the disciplinary process? It's correct behaviour. They're leaving in 3 days.
Yeah. Don't be robotic is the message, isn't it?
Yeah, be supportive.
Yeah. One final question from me. What's next for the Peninsula Group?
You look at consumer confidence. I think it's a period of consolidation for us. Canada's still growing, a very new market for us. Yeah. Obviously, it's an opportunity to go into the US in the future, but Canada's still a massive growth area. And such a big geography, people don't realise. Going from a Vancouver to Toronto office is not like going from a Manchester to London office. So I think stability, I think technology is going to drive a lot of our decisions.
Yeah.
AI is only at the front door of our business. There's a lot more for us to do. But I think growth in Canada and AI are the big two opportunities for us within the Peninsula Group.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Well done, Kate, as well, for having your boss.
I know,
yeah. Very brave.
Do I get a promotion, Alan, for this podcast?
Pay rise, obviously. Yeah.
Pay rise.
So our green pathways we talked about earlier.
Well swerved, Alan.
Everyone knows there's always progression with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.